Hi guys, today I'm going to tell you why you wouldn't last a day among the Amazons. Who they really were, how they lived, fought, trained, and why there was very little room for weakness in their world. These aren't just myths. Many stories about the Amazons are based on real facts. So, get comfortable. There's an interesting story ahead, and many more unexpected details. On the open steppes, where piercing winds blow in winter and the air burns with heat in summer, many tribes once lived. These lands stretched from Ukraine and southern Russia to the Altai and Kazakhstan. It is here, according to historians and archaeologists, that the real Amazons were born. Only they did not call themselves that. They were Scythians, Sarmatians, Sauromations, nomadic peoples. They had no sturdy houses or stone cities. Their homes were yurts made of wood and felt. Everything they owned could fit on a wagon. But they had one thing they valued above all else: the horse. From early childhood, girls were taught to ride. This was nothing unusual. Boys and girls were trained equally. By the age of 3 or 4, a girl was already sitting in the saddle like an adult, first with her mother, then on her own. Horseback riding was not a sport for them. It was survival. If you couldn't ride, you couldn't escape an enemy, catch prey, or deliver a message. And in the open plains, where there is nowhere to hide, speed is life. As soon as a child could confidently stay in the saddle, they were given a bow. Children's bows were weaker, but the arrows could still injure or kill an animal. Girls were taught to shoot while riding, at full gallop, accurately, quickly. They had to keep balance, not drop the bow, and not fall. After a few years, they could shoot as well as the men. Weapons were not just tools, they were an extension of the body. The ability to fight, to defend, and attack was part of their upbringing. These girls didn't live in a world where they were protected. On the contrary, the world was dangerous, and any nomadic camp could be their last. Raids by other tribes, looting, wars, all of this was constant. So a woman had to know not only how to cook or sew, but how to kill. Not because she was cruel, but because otherwise she would die, and with her, her children, her livestock, her kin. In many burial mounds discovered by archaeologists, women lie with wounds, broken bones, and traces of swords and arrows. These marks show they fought. And beside their bodies, swords, axes, bows, arrows, bronze armor. These were not ornaments. This was combat gear. Often horse harnesses are found nearby. They were buried with their beloved horses. Such graves have been found in dozens of places, from Ukraine to Mongolia. Amazon clothing was practical, not dresses or tunics like Greek women wore, but trousers and short jackets. Everything was made for riding. Their hair was braided. A woman could command a troop. This was not unusual. If she was strong, smart, and respected, she became a leader. In nomadic tribes, strength and experience were respected, not gender. This is how groups arose where a woman was in charge. People listened to her, respected her, and she led them into battle. There were priestesses, women who knew herbs, healed, performed rituals. There were huntresses, trackers, craftswomen. Their lives were full of labor, pain, risk, but also of freedom, the kind Greek or Roman women could only dream of. The Amazons didn't stay at home. Their home was the steppe, their bed, a felt mattress in a yurt, their ceiling, the sky. They traveled with the tribe, hunted, protected herds. They could be mothers, but that didn't stop them from taking up arms. In one hand, a child, in the other, a sword. No one thought a woman couldn't fight. If you couldn't, you were a burden. They were not like modern feminists or rights activists. They had no theories, but they had practice. If you want to survive, take the bow. If your husband dies, you lead the herd yourself. If enemies attack, you don't hide, you mount your horse and ride into battle. They lived closely with nature. They knew herbs, animal tracks, the weather. They had no books, but they had living memory. A girl learned from her mother, her aunt, the older women. She watched how to string a bow, treat wounds, choose a path. Everything was passed on through words and actions. The Amazons were not a myth, but part of everyday life in those times. Today, they might be compared to special forces soldiers, but without technology, medicine, or supply chains. Just you, your horse, and a world full of enemies. These were women who lived by the laws of the steppe. Be strong or die. The myth that they cut off a breast is fiction. Not a single skeleton confirms it. Their bodies were normal, like any woman's. They simply knew how to use weapons. They were feminine, but in a different way, not through makeup or dresses, but through strength, confidence, freedom. The real Amazons existed for hundreds of years. Then new times came. The Romans, the Persians, Christianity, Islam. Women were pushed back into the home, but the memory remained. Archaeologists lift bones from the earth, examine ancient swords, and once again realize these were warriors, and among them, women. Many women.
In the steppes, everything began at birth. A girl was not welcomed as a fragile creature, not rocked in a lacy cradle. From her first days, she lived like everyone else. Under the wind's howl, in a yurt, beside the fire, in the arms of a mother who, at that very moment, might be cooking food, milking a mare, or sharpening an arrow. The sounds were always there. Hoofbeats, horses neighing, the creak of wagon wheels. That was her childhood, harsh, noisy, alive. From infancy, a girl lived in the saddle. At first, her mother held her in front while riding, later behind her back. When the girl reached the age of 3 or 4, she was given a pony, a small, calm horse. If she fell, she got back up. If she was scared, no matter, she'd get used to it. The steppe left no room for weakness. Fall, earn a scar, and remember how not to fall next time. Someone was always riding nearby. Mother, brother, aunt, but no one pampered her. In this culture, it was believed the earlier you learn, the longer you live. By the age of 6, a girl could already gallop, stop, turn, stand in the stirrups. She could tie a sack to a saddle, pitch a tent, light a fire. And from that age began her real weapons training. First, the bow. A child's bow made of flexible birch or bone. First, shooting at sacks, then at targets. Missed, laugh, and try again. Laughter and pain were always nearby. Girls were taught not just to shoot, but to shoot on horseback. That was the key skill, to hit the target without dismounting. They aimed at full speed with both hands, later with real combat bows. Not everyone could draw one. Some had bowstrings tear their skin or break their nails, but no one complained. The weak would fall behind on their own. The sword, axe, and knife came later. Not all girls wielded them equally. Some were archers, some were riders, some went into close combat. Skills varied, but they were taught everything: how to strike, how to dodge, how to wound an enemy's horse. It was all practiced until it became instinct. Can I skip this? Such a question didn't exist. The tribe wouldn't wait. If you weren't ready, no one would save you when the enemy came. But besides weapons, they were taught crafts. A girl had to know how to sew leather clothing, tan hides, cook food, stitch wounds. It wasn't about gender roles, it was about survival. At any moment, you could be alone, and you had to know how to live. Skills were like a second sword. By the age of 13 or 14, a girl became a full-fledged warrior. She was already fighting. She could already be married, if she wanted to. But many didn't. In these tribes, a woman was not obligated to marry. She could live alone, with a friend, with her mother, with a child from a brief affair. The main thing was strength and respect. If you were valuable in battle, no one would tell you to go wash clothes. Some wore ornaments, earrings, copper bracelets, necklaces made from enemies' bones. It wasn't about fashion, it was a message. I've been through battle. I survived. I'm a woman, but I fear no warrior. He fears me. Respect didn't come from appearance, but from experience. They were honored for courage, for endurance, for a precise shot, for saving a comrade. The elder women, those who had survived decades, were like living books. They taught rituals, songs, prayers. They told how to find water in the barren steppe, how to save a sick horse, how to lead a group through a snowstorm. No one called them goddesses. They were simply listened to, because they had been through it all. These girls had no schools, books, or tablets. Life was their school. The world was their textbook. Their horses, their partners, their weapons, their tools of survival. They were not victims, not heroes. They were what the steppe demanded they be. When dust rises over the steppe, and the wind carries the scent of smoke and fear, no one, neither man nor woman, can remain aside. In the nomadic world, war came quickly and often. No walls, no fortresses, only you, your horse, your weapon, and the plains around. And that's when the battle began. The warrior women knew beforehand. The horses grew restless. The dogs howled at night. Neighbors sent word through messengers. A woman didn't wait for orders. She knew what to do. Prepare her bow, sharpen her arrows, pack food, tie a water flask to her saddle. Check the reins. Everything had to be ready. Every minute counted. They rode out early, before dawn, silent, saving their voices. It was the stillness before the storm. Women rode beside the men, not behind. They weren't kept in the rear. Sometimes they led the vanguard. If you could shoot straight, move fast, and feel no fear, you went first. Before battle, they didn't paint their faces or give speeches. Everything they needed was already within, in their bodies, their memories, their fingers, their saddle. The only ritual was tying back their hair with a tight band or cutting it short so nothing would block their view. Quick movements, precise gestures, like a predator before the leap. When the battle began, they didn't scream right away. Stealth was key. A flank approach, an ambush from behind a hill. Cavalry moved in waves. The warrior women galloped along the sides, firing arrows. Their shots came fast, 10 to 12 arrows per minute. even at full gallop. Every shot hit its mark. A childhood of training made archery a reflex. They didn't fight for glory. They fought because the enemy came to steal livestock, take land, kill children, enslave the old. This was survival. The steppe didn't forgive mistakes. Any battle could be the last. A warrior woman knew if she fell from her horse, she might not rise again. So she struck first, didn't wait, didn't hesitate. When fighting moved to close quarters, they used short swords, knives, battle axes, light weapons, the kind that wouldn't interfere in the saddle. Their blows weren't about strength, but speed and precision. To the arm, the neck, the enemy's thigh, sometimes just to the horse, to unseat and break the formation. They didn't wail, didn't tear their chests. They fought silently, swiftly, ruthlessly. But when they won, then they raised their voices. The battle cry of the Amazons was sharp and high-pitched, like a hawk's scream. It echoed across the steppe and struck fear into enemies. Because if a woman isn't afraid of blood, what could she possibly fear? If someone in their squad fell, others covered them. They didn't abandon. Sometimes they lost, not because they were weak, but because the enemy was more numerous, stronger, luckier. Then they retreated, not in shame, but fighting, laying traps, setting ambushes. Warrior women didn't die in place. They pulled their own back, hid, returned at night, struck again. The steppe was their home, and it protected them. After battle, they didn't cry. If someone died, they buried them with their weapon, as befit a warrior. They sang songs, not mournful, but triumphant, because to die with a sword in hand was an honor. And those who survived sharpened arrows again, taught the girls to shoot again, rode forward again. These women had no medals, no certificates, no awards. Their reward was the respect of the tribe. A word, "She pulled us out of the ambush," or "She killed 3 enemies," or simply a nod, a place by the fire, and silence where no words were needed. Their bodies bore scars from swords, spears, arrows. Their hands were rough, sinewy, but in those bodies was strength, not just physical, strength of spirit, calm, cold, like the steppe wind, quiet, but unbreakable. They weren't superhuman. They were real. They got tired. They were afraid. But they rode into battle anyway, because they knew, if not you, then who? Because that's how they were raised. Because that's how life was. That's how the steppe was. When the battle ended, and blood soaked into the earth, and the wind rose again over the steppe, everyday life returned. But the Amazons had no rest in the usual sense. Their peace was like a horse's breath after a gallop, short, noisy, alert. Even in peace, they lived on the edge. After a battle, they returned to camp. The first tasks were not songs or rest, but treating wounds, checking supplies, setting up new tents, feeding the horses. Those who were uninjured helped those who needed aid. No warrior was just a fighter. She had to be a healer, a cook, a hunter, a tailor, and a herder at once. These women had no women's work. All work was shared. The warrior women knew the body well, not from books, but from experience. One knew how to set a bone. Another could stitch a deep wound. They used herbs, wormwood, sage, roots, resins. They applied them to burns, to open wounds. They knew how to stop bleeding, how to reduce fever. This knowledge was passed down from the elders, not in words, but through action.
They bathed in rivers, not for beauty, for cleanliness, to keep wounds from festering. Hair was often short, for practicality. Those with long hair braided it tightly, kept it bound. Their clothes were made of leather and wool, handmade, soft inside, tough outside, often sewn anew from what remained of enemies. Their food was simple, dried meat, porridge from grains, soups over the fire. They drank little wine or mead, mostly during rituals, but food was fuel. Without food, there was no strength. That's why every warrior woman knew how to hunt, butcher meat, dry it in the sun, boil fat, store it in flasks. One who couldn't feed herself didn't live long. They didn't live in cities. Their homes were tents made of felt, hide, and wood, light, warm, wind-resistant, could be packed and set up in an hour. Inside, furs, blankets, pots, weapons, everything essential and nothing more. Each had her own space, her own silence. Even sleeping three to a tent, no one intruded on another's rest. A fighter needed to be rested. Between battles, they trained, always trained, even the older ones. Knew ways to string a bow, to make a trap, to craft an arrow. They never thought, I already know enough. Because the next enemy could be different, faster, smarter, and you had to be ready. They laughed, not always, but they knew how. The humor was rough, but honest. They could laugh at a fall, a missed shot, a scar. Laughter was healing. It kept them from breaking. And there were songs, simple, long, monotone, to the voice of the steppe, to remind them that they were still human, not just warriors. They dreamed. Some warrior women were mothers, but all raised the children. Because the tribe was family. A child knew he had 20 aunts who would teach him, protect him, tell him the truth. A woman with a baby on her back could shoot as well as any other. There was no line between mother and fighter. There was only life. They believed in the forces of nature, in the sun which warms and burns, in the wind which carries away enemies, in the earth which gives life. There were no temples, no bearded gods. There were spirits, ancestors, signs. They might throw bones before a raid, burn herbs to seek an answer, but not blindly. They believed that above all, it was your hand, your will, your resolve that mattered. They were respected, not because they were feared, but because people knew if a warrior woman was beside you, you would not die alone. She would cover you. She would pull you out. She would speak the truth. In these women, there was more brotherhood than in many men's armies. At night, they looked at the stars in silence. Each had her own fear, her past, her victories, but none felt alone, because they were together, because they were united, not by blood, but by choice, the choice to be strong, not out of pride, but out of necessity. When a nomadic tribe approached foreign borders, the first thing seen from the hill wasn't tents or herds. First, the riders. By the horse's gait, by the glint of spear tips, by the formation, one could tell someone was coming in peace or with intent. But if there were women among the group, in battle gear, with bows, in the saddle, strangers grew tense. Because they knew such women weren't there for show. They shoot, they cut, they lead, they give orders. And most importantly, they are not afraid. In the nomadic world, respect wasn't granted for gender. It had to be earned. A woman on a horse, weapon in hand, with raids, hunts, and battles behind her, was recognized as a force, regardless of her origin. Many men from other tribes, seeing warrior women for the first time, felt mixed emotions: surprise, skepticism, unease. They were unlike the usual image of women in sedentary cultures, not veiled, not with downcast eyes, not silent. These women spoke plainly, looked you in the eye, didn't avert their gaze from elders. They could challenge decisions at war councils, argue with men, point out where fortifications should be built. And they were listened to, not out of courtesy, out of necessity. Experience dictated, if she speaks, she knows. Different peoples viewed them differently. Tribes without a tradition of female warriors treated them warily. Among sedentary Scythians, Persians, and Greeks, women were seen as keepers of the home, not of the sword. When tribes with female fighters clashed with such cultures, misunderstanding and even shock followed. There are accounts of Greek warriors losing their fighting spirit when facing female warriors. To them, it felt wrong, as if the world had turned upside down. But there were also those who saw the Amazons as worthy enemies. An enemy who could deceive, encircle, shoot straight into the heart and show no mercy, inspired not mockery, but fear. Stories of warrior women spread quickly through the steppe. One all-female detachment attacked a caravan. They took no prisoners, no gold, only horses and food. No trace, no noise, only hoof prints. And everyone knew it was them. Many men, especially the young, initially tried to test the Amazons, provoke, challenge, mock them. Some got slapped, some got arrows whizzing past their ears, some only contempt. Eventually they stopped, because the Amazons didn't pretend to be strong. They were strength itself, and anyone who forgot that soon faced the consequences. Sometimes men tried to
Meanwhile, not everything was built on hostility. Sometimes the Amazons became allies. If tribes united, if a common threat came, men and women fought side by side. At such times they shared everything: fires, food, blood. Then respect was earned through action. A man might say, "I'm riding with her because she is the shield at my back," and that meant more than 1,000 speeches. Some tribes tried to tame the Amazons through marriage. Male warlords, elders, offered to marry warrior women, give them land, a tent, children, but many refused. Because marriage wasn't their goal. Their goal was freedom, their own choice, their own path. Those who agreed did so on their own terms, no submission, no prohibitions, otherwise they just left. Others tried to control their lives through pressure, said, "Lay down your weapon, become a mother, stay in the tent." But that rarely worked, because a woman who had known the steppe couldn't live within borders. She needed space, and above all, choice. And if choice wasn't given, she took it by force. Still, not everything was a romantic tale of strength. There were tragedies. There were cases where women were captured by hostile tribes and broken, stripped of weapons, raped, treated as trophies. But even then, they fought, killed themselves, killed the guards, poisoned food. Their resilience became legend, not because they were superhuman, but because they never surrendered to the end. In some cultures, myths began to form.
That they weren't real women, but spirits, children of gods, creatures without men, who conceived from wind or fire. That they had no souls, only rage. Such stories arose from fear, because when you can't understand strength, you begin to mystify or demonize it. Many men who spent time near the Amazons came to see them not as wonders, but as equals. They saw a woman healing wounds, cooking food, riding into battle, saving a child, and then sitting silently by the fire, with no pride, just living. That shattered preconceptions. And some learned, changed. Not all, but enough that over time, in some tribes, women began to sit on councils, lead hunts, teach children alongside men. Amazons didn't just fight. They changed culture. There was another side, envy. Women from other, especially sedentary cultures, often envied the Amazons' freedom. Word of women in armor reached distant villages. Girls heard the stories and dreamed. Not all dared, but a dream is already dangerous to the system. So in many cultures, stories of the Amazons were forbidden. Women's warbands were not born in a day. They took shape like clay under a master's hand, slowly, from necessity, from pain, from strength. No tribe ever woke up one morning thinking, "Let the women go to war." It all came from reality. When the men were killed at the borders, when the enemy came to the camp, when there was no one left to defend them, women picked up weapons and did not put them down. At first it was chaos. One brave woman, then 2 more, then 5, then 10, then a war band. Not by order, but by resolve. They weren't warriors' wives. They were warriors who had a reason to protect children, land, sisters, themselves. No one assembled them. They gathered on their own, because who else would? Leaders weren't appointed from above. The one who led was the one who knew how, who didn't panic in battle, who knew how to survive the winter, who could raise you with a word and stop a fight with a look. Respect wasn't given for age. It had to be earned. A woman could be the youngest, but if she pulled a sister from an ambush, if she rode first into the fight, if she could read tracks like stories, others followed her. To join the warband, saying, "I want to," wasn't enough. You had to be tested, not on paper, not with ceremony, in real life. A newcomer was taken on a scouting mission, on a hunt, into a skirmish. They watched how she held a spear, how she handled fear, how she helped the wounded, whether she talked too much, whether she knew how to be silent. Because in battle, you need someone you can rely on. One mistake means death for all. If a girl couldn't handle it, no one yelled after her. They just didn't take her again, or sent her to others, those who trained the weak. There were women who taught, not on the battlefield, but in the shadows. They showed how to draw a bow, how to stand in the saddle, how to breathe in battle. They taught day and night, patiently, because they knew tomorrow that student might save your life. Each warrior had her own weapon, not identical. Some carried sabers, some spears, some a pair of knives. But there was one rule. You had to know how to fight up close and from afar, and more importantly, how to defend not only yourself, but the one beside you. The warband had discipline, unwritten but strict. If they agreed to rise before dawn, everyone rose. If silence was declared, not a word was spoken. Those who broke the rules were punished, not with shouting, with labor, or by being left out of the next battle. And that was worse, because everyone knew battle wasn't just a fight. It was an honor. It meant, you are one of us. No one in the warband stood But there was another kind of hierarchy, by experience. The elders taught the younger, not from above, but beside, quietly, through example. If someone lost their sword, they weren't mocked. They were given another, but warned, next time, find your own. There was one law for cowardice: leave, or stay and earn your place again. Open cowardice, running away in battle, abandoning your sisters, was shameful. That woman could be exiled, sometimes silently. No words were needed. She felt the eyes. Sometimes the war band held a gathering to decide her fate, but most often she never came back. Betrayal meant something else. If you deliberately endangered others, gave away the plan, revealed the camp to the enemy, helped outsiders, there was only one punishment: silent, swift. Sometimes an arrow in the night. Sometimes exile, never to return. The Amazons didn't keep traitors close, because trust was the core of life. Without it, everything falls apart. But it wasn't all harshness. There was support in the war band. If someone lost a sister, she wasn't left alone. The women embraced, sat beside her, shared silence, because pain is not healed by words. It is healed by presence. And no one judged tears. Tears weren't weakness. They were proof the heart was still alive. Sometimes the young came, too young, 13, 14 years old, with eyes full of fear, but lips pressed with determination. Then the elders decided, don't throw her into battle. Teach her, prepare her. Leave her with the horses, on hunts, on patrols. And only when they saw that her spirit was ready, she joined the true war band. Not for blood, but for becoming. The women's war band was a family, not in the usual sense, without cuddles or sweet words, but with deep connection. They knew if one died, another would carry her body. If one was wounded, she wouldn't be left behind. If one fell, they would lift her, because the lone one is prey. But a war band is power. They weren't let into homes. No monuments were built for them. But in the songs whispered by campfires, lines were dedicated to them. Boys listened and dreamed. Girls listened and remembered. Because being a warrior isn't about the sword. It's about the choice, the resilience, the refusal to bow your head, even when you're afraid. Old age in the steppe did not come suddenly. It crept in through a knee that no longer bent like before, through a shoulder that ached after every training session, through a gaze where, instead of fire, there appeared a long silence. Amazons, like all people, aged, but old age did not make them weaker. It made them different. When a warrior could no longer hold a bow for hours or ride for 3 days straight, she did not become useless. On the contrary, her value grew, because she carried something that neither spear nor sword could give: experience. Such women were called by different names. Some peoples called them the wise, others those who have seen blood. But everyone understood, if the young wanted to survive, they should listen to the elder, because the old Amazon knew where the enemy hid, in the bushes, when a snake slithered out of the hole, and how many breaths a horse had left before its last sprint. She taught not from books, but through scars. They did not retreat to tents or sit with children. They had their role. They taught. Every morning, when the mist still lay over the land, The old woman went out onto the plain and waited. Whoever came, learned. Whoever didn't, came later, when a wound demanded attention. They taught not only how to wield weapons, they explained how to survive, how not to quarrel with other women in the war band, how to resolve disputes, how to read signs on the ground, how to hold yourself after a battle when your hands tremble and your heart is silent, because a fight is not just the body, it is the soul. And the young did not always have the words to understand what was happening to them. The elders did not speak much. They showed how to bandage a wound, how to stop the blood from flowing too fast, how to die, if it had to be, with open eyes. They did not teach suffering. They taught readiness. These women carried weight. When a dispute arose, they decided. When tension grew in the war band, their word was final, because everyone knew this woman had already gone through what others still had ahead. Sometimes former warriors became keepers of knowledge. They collected stories, remembered battles, taught the girls not only to fight, but to remember. Because if you forget, you repeat. But if you remember, you have already half won. Sometimes, in rare moments, they sang, not at celebrations, not at weddings, but at night, by the fire. The songs were strange, harsh, not always. Death was not an enemy to them. It was familiar. It came when it had to. Not too early, not too late. Sometimes they died alone, sometimes in the arms of their pupils. Sometimes they just walked to a distant hill and never returned. But even in this, there was order, because their path was complete. After their death, the war band did not shout, did not hold farewells, but for one night no one slept. They sat, silent. Someone sharpened a blade. Someone stared at the sky, because she who left had left inside not emptiness, but knowledge, and that is more than memory. Some stayed in the community, taught children, but not as grandmothers, as those who knew how the world was made. Boys listened, girls learned to stand tall, and the whole generation grew stronger because it had a foundation. No one knew all the names of the old Amazons. They did not seek fame. But in every war band, at every camp, in every tribe, there was one who was respected, not for strength, but for knowing when to be silent and when to speak. Women belonging to Amazon communities viewed child-rearing differently from most other tribes. In those lands where survival depended on strength and determination, girls were taught independence and resilience from a very young age. They were educated not only in the basics of household skills, but also in combat, how to throw a spear, draw a bow, read tracks, and recognize dangers. Girls grew up surrounded by strong women who did not coddle them, but prepared them for a harsh life. Excessive gentleness was seen as weakness and danger. But cruelty was not the goal either. They were taught to understand that fear was not an enemy, but a signal that helped keep them alive. They were taught friendship and support, because a lone person in the forest was easy prey. When Amazons had children, they were often raised together, in groups, like brothers and sisters. The mother might not always be nearby, but she always knew the child was surrounded by care and teaching. This collective responsibility helped preserve traditions and skills. Daughters were taught that the sword was not just a weapon, but a symbol of choice and responsibility. Not everyone received it. Those who were weaker or not ready could focus on crafts, medicine, or mentorship. It was important to understand. Everyone in the community was needed, not just warriors.
Sometimes Amazons accepted outsider girls, refugees, captives, or orphans. These girls went through a long and difficult path to prove their strength and will. Not all endured the trials, but those who remained became part of a new family and were given the chance to start over, learn, and become protectors. Upbringing was not only preparation for war, but also for character. Girls were taught to face hardships, not fear loneliness, and be loyal to their own. They were told that betrayal was the gravest crime, and support was the most important quality. In childhood and youth, they learned to understand nature, when to gather berries, where to find water, how to read the weather from the wind. This knowledge was passed from generation to generation and was no less valuable than the ability to wield a weapon. Training took place in various conditions, on the plains, in the forests, by the rivers. Often girls accompanied elders on journeys and learned through practice. These were long days without rest, where a mistake meant risk. Through these trials, character was formed, steadfast, determined, and responsible. Those who grew up in Amazon communities rarely complained about life. They understood that being strong did not mean being cruel, but being ready for struggle and protection. And this readiness was passed from mother to daughter, from mentor to pupil, binding generations together. Contrary to common belief, the Amazons did not live in permanent cities or fortresses. Their settlements were well thought out and functional, although they differed from male military camps or large trading centers. These women created homes and villages that allowed them to survive, maintain their strength, and be ready for any threat. The main feature of their settlements was that they were closely connected with nature and located in places where they could quickly hide, conceal themselves, or organize a defense. Usually, the settlements were situated in forested or mountainous areas, on riverbanks where there was fresh water, game, and building resources. The primary goal in choosing a location was to ensure safety and comfort. The Amazon women sought so-called natural fortresses, hills with a good vantage point, surrounded by dense forests or swamps, making it difficult to approach unnoticed. Access to a river or water source was also very important. Water was needed not only for drinking, but also for fishing and washing. The settlement itself was relatively small, housing from several dozen to several hundred people, depending on the size of the community. Not only warriors lived there, but also children, elderly, and women who practiced crafts, medicine, and other necessary tasks. The dwellings were built from available materials: wood, clay, stone, and animal hides. Typically, these were simple but sturdy houses with a gabled roof covered with straw or tree bark. Inside, there were several compartments, a place for sleeping, cooking, and storing supplies. An important part of the house was the hearth, the source of heat and light around which the family gathered. The women built their homes themselves or under the guidance of experienced elders. Often, the structures were constructed in a way that made it easy to hide or leave the settlement in case of danger. For example, some settlements had underground passages or secret storages for valuable possessions. Besides individual houses, a communal building was usually located in the center of the settlement, a place for meetings and training young warrior women. Here they discussed plans for hunting, battles, resolved internal disputes, and passed knowledge from elders to the younger ones. This building symbolized the unity and strength of the entire community. Great attention was paid to cleanliness and order. Since the settlements were surrounded by wild nature, diseases or insects could easily appear. Therefore, the Amazons made sure that waste was taken out of the settlement, sewage did not accumulate nearby, and food was stored in special dry places. The food of the Amazons was obtained and cultivated depending on the region. They knew how to hunt large game, deer, boars, birds, using bows, spears, and traps. Hunting was a collective effort. Groups of women would set up ambushes, surround the prey, and choose the best moment to strike.
Fishing also played an important role. In settlements located on rivers or lakes, the women set nets, caught fish with spears, or simply gathered mollusks and crayfish. Fish was not only a nutritious product, but also a good source of fats and proteins, besides wild game. The Amazons knew how to grow plants and herbs. They cultivated small gardens around the settlement, where they planted vegetables, berries, and medicinal herbs. Plant cultivation was not their primary activity, but complemented their diet and provided a supply of vitamins and minerals. Knowledge of herbs and their properties was passed down from elders. This was important for treating wounds and illnesses. Storage of supplies was carefully planned. During harvest season or after a successful hunt, the Amazons gathered and dried meat, fish, berries, roots, so they would have food in the cold season. Supplies were hidden in special storages, protected from rodents and moisture. This gave confidence that no one would be left without food in winter. Life in the settlement was organized so that every woman and girl knew her place and role. The younger and weaker ones handled cleaning, cooking, and child rearing. The more experienced taught military skills, care for the wounded, and crafts. Everyone knew that the life of the whole group depended on each individual. Order in the settlement was maintained not only by leaders, but also by elder women, who ensured rules and traditions were followed. If someone broke discipline, they were warned, and in serious cases, punished. Punishments could range from public reproach to temporary exclusion from common affairs. The goal was to preserve unity and strength of the community. Safety of the settlement was a priority. The Amazons organized round-the-clock guard duty. Watchers were posted along the perimeter and rotated at set intervals. The watchers could not only warn of danger, but also quickly react, gathering warriors and preparing for defense. To increase protection, fences made of thorny branches or wooden palisades were sometimes built around the settlement. In other cases, natural barriers were used, ditches, stone embankments, complex shrub labyrinths that made it difficult for uninvited guests to enter. Such measures helped repel both wild animals and enemies. Signal systems were an important part of the defense. These could be fires, smoke, or sound signals, drums, gongs, whistles. If someone noticed danger, they quickly gave a signal, and all women gathered in the central building or main square, ready for battle. The Amazons also carefully planned their expeditions and movements. When they needed to go far for hunting or reconnaissance, they took a minimal set of things: weapons, food, water. It was important to leave the settlement protected, so some women always stayed for guarding. In battle, the Amazons used not only strength, but also cunning. They knew the terrain perfectly, could quickly hide or camouflage themselves. They often set ambushes or sudden attacks, then disappeared into the forest, giving the enemy no chance to respond. Internal relations in the settlement were based on respect and mutual help. The Amazons did not make distinctions by status or age when it came to protection and survival. In critical situations, they became one organism, each knowing that a reliable ally stood behind her back. Special attention was paid to medicine and care for the wounded. The settlement always had a group of women knowledgeable in herbs and healing methods. Wounds were treated quickly and carefully to prevent infection. Sometimes primitive surgeries were performed, extracting arrows or cutting out damaged tissues. These healer women not only treated the body, but cared for the soul. In battle or hunt, wounds were not only physical. Fear, fatigue, loss of comrades left deep scars.
The task of the elders and healers was to support and restore fighting spirit. Life in the settlement, despite constant readiness for battle, was rich and joyful. Festivals gathered everyone together. They sang songs, told stories, taught children dances and crafts. This helped preserve the spirit of the community and maintain ties between generations. Night guards sitting by the fires shared observations of stars, told about seasons and changes in nature. The young listened with interest, absorbing the wisdom of their ancestors. This tradition was not just culture, it was a necessity for survival. Children in the settlement grew free, but disciplined. They were taught to respect nature, each other, and strength. No tantrums or complaints were tolerated, but they were never forced to do anything that threatened their lives. Education was built on the example of elders. The Amazons were not just warriors, they were the mistresses of their land. They knew where mushrooms grew, when to gather honey, how to protect crops from wild animals. Every day was a struggle and care, not only for themselves, but also for the future. Over time, settlements developed. Workshops were built where they made clothes from hides and fabrics, tools from stone and metal, decorations from bones and wood. This was not just craft, it was part of culture passed down through generations. The Amazons did not aspire to big cities or wealth. Their strength lay in freedom and the ability to live by their own rules. They did not wait for help from outside. They built, defended, and taught themselves. And in this was their true power. Often, Amazon settlements faced external threats. In Amazonian settlements, crafts and household duties occupied a significant part of the women's daily lives. They were not only warriors, but also skilled artisans, capable of creating everything necessary for life and defense. The well-being of the settlement, as well as the strength and reliability of their homes, weapons, and clothing, depended on their abilities. One of the most important crafts was clothing production. In the wilderness, clothing had to serve not only for comfort, but also for protection against cold, insects, and injuries. The Amazons used animal hides and leather obtained through hunting. The hides were processed, cleaned of meat remnants, dried and tanned using special methods to make them soft and flexible. From these materials, they sewed tunics, trousers, footwear, and even gloves. To decorate their clothing, they used plant fibers and dyes made from berries and tree bark. They painted the fabrics with simple patterns, each carrying specific meanings, indicating group affiliation, age, or personal achievements. These patterns were part of the culture passed down from generation to generation. Weapon making was a specialized craft requiring both knowledge and skill. The Amazons crafted bows from flexible yet strong types of wood, most often ash or yew. Bowstrings were woven from animal sinew or plant fibers. Arrows were made from straight, thin branches and tipped with sharp points made of stone, bone, or metal. Metal was rare and expensive at the time, so it was reserved for the most crucial parts. In addition to bows and arrows, the Amazons made spears and knives. Spears were used both for throwing and close combat. Knives were universal tools for cutting meat, crafting, and daily chores. Craftswomen also wove baskets and nets. Baskets were essential for gathering berries and roots, storing crops, and carrying game from hunts. Nets were used for fishing. The ability to make strong yet light nets enabled them to catch fish and small animals successfully. Wood and stoneworking allowed them to craft not only weapons, but also household tools, spoons, bowls, sticks, and ornaments. Carved items were especially valued, often used to decorate homes and clothing. The Amazons possessed advanced medical knowledge for their time. They studied the properties of plants, herbs, and minerals used to treat wounds, illnesses, and poisonings. They knew which herbs relieved pain, promoted healing, or helped with colds and other ailments. One of their key tasks was treating injuries sustained in battle or during hunts. In the wilderness, infection could be fatal, so proper care was essential. Wounds were treated with herbal infusions, washed and bandaged. They also knew methods involving herbal baths and compresses to restore strength and relieve fatigue. Knowledge was passed from experienced healers to younger women through training and hands-on practice. Nutrition in the settlements was diverse, though it varied depending on the region and time of year. The core of their diet was game, deer, boar, birds. Meat was usually cooked over fire, roasted, stewed, or dried for storage. Fish supplemented their meals, especially in settlements near bodies of water. Vegetables and berries were either cultivated or foraged in the wild. During the cold seasons, they relied on dried stores and pickled foods. Clay pots and stone slabs were used for cooking. Hearths were placed in the center of dwellings or outdoors, allowing for both warmth and the preparation of large meals. Festivals and rituals held an important place in Amazonian life. Despite harsh conditions, they found time for rest, socializing, and strengthening communal bonds. During festivals, they sang songs, danced, and shared stories about ancestors and great battles. These events preserved traditions, lifted spirits, and united people. Some celebrations were tied to nature's cycles, changes of seasons, harvest time, hunting. On such days, they held communal feasts, exchanged gifts, and held athletic competitions testing strength and skill. Traditions required respect for nature and its spirits. Although the Amazons didn't follow complex religious systems, they believed in maintaining balance with their environment. Before hunts or expeditions, they offered gifts to appease natural forces, bring good fortune, and seek protection from harm. Within the settlements, a strict hierarchy existed, based not on age or strength, but on experience, wisdom, and merit. Leaders were women who had proven themselves in action, battle, and judgment. They were respected, consulted, and tasked with resolving disputes and guiding the community's development. Raising the next generation was the responsibility of the entire community. Girls were taught from an early age not only crafts and martial arts, but also communication, responsibility, and mutual support. Listening to elders and helping the younger ones was considered an honor. Education was practical. Mentors taught through example, in battle, on hunts, or in workshops. Every girl had to pass rigorous trials to prove her readiness to become part of the adult community. Those who failed received support and guidance, but were not exempt from responsibility. Constant training maintained the fighting capability of the community. Daily drills included archery, spear throwing, and hand-to-hand combat. This was essential, as threats could arise at any moment. The Amazons often relocated if conditions in a settlement became unfavorable. If supplies were exhausted, enemies threatened, or natural disasters loomed. These moves were